Today on Game of Attention, we're talking about digital depth or traditional trust and where advertising falls, how attention comes into it, what its role is. And I'm really excited to have Gordon and Paul with me to discuss this. Paul, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Paul. I look after the ads business for Uber in the UK, and I've been here about 15 months now, building a team. I spent a long time in the advertising markets, working at places like Sky and Amazon and Apple and various other places, and Omnicom. So nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And hi, I'm Gordon. So I'm head of client services in FMCG retail loyalty space for Marketreach. Marketreach is a media owner. Our channel is Letterbox. So I'm here to talk about the work I do in relation to the questions with FMCG brands and the way they've harnessed the power of the channel.
Great. Thank you both for being here. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation given where you both fall on the scale of advertising, particularly around attention. I know we've got some great resources to look at and discuss. The first question, Paul, if I could pass to you, please.
hmm
Considering the strengths of both traditional and digital advertising methods, what does the ideal media mix look like for a campaign, aiming for both broad reach and targeted engagement?
Wow. I mean, it's been interesting, hasn't it? I mean, because the UK is pretty unusual in terms of the percentage that is digitally focused as a mix of overall media. But one of the things that I think people tend to forget about the UK, and actually there's some data on this that is driven a lot by the SME market. So there's a lot, the SMEs are very heavily engaged and integrated into the likes of Google, Amazon, and all those types of players as well. So there's a slight skew there, which then means, what is the right mix? I think the right mix is whatever's right for your business, and that's a decision you make, not that anybody else can make. I do think we've embraced digital because our consumers have, and I think that's important. But that doesn't mean to say that there's a lot of other channels out there that don't work. I mean, I don't run the marketing team for Uber, but I know we use a lot of different channels for our mix because while we are a digital marketplace stroke service provider, we still need those other channels out there. And I think that's going to continue. I think those channels are evolving. Obviously, out of home's evolving, TV's evolving. So there's still a lot of change going on in those markets, but I think they're still all valid and relevant. But it just depends on where you're at. Your ultimate outcome you want to achieve is.
Yeah, and to that point, I totally agree. So your objectives, your audience, and your budget, of course, will play a huge part in determining the most appropriate mix of channels to reach the end consumer. I talk in terms of attention, connection, and reaction, and you know, in this multimedia word, the fragmentation of media, I suppose to the lazy observation is that it's never been easier to reach people, but actually that fragmentation and exposure explosion that we've seen in recent years makes it actually harder than ever to connect with people. And if you look at organizations like the Advert Research Foundation, they talk 1 to 2 platforms, 1 to 2 channels will give you an uplift typically on ROI of 19%. But if you increase that to 5%, you typically might see, ROI boosted by 35%. So it's definitely a combination of integrated media to achieve those objectives. Are you telling a big story? Are you an established brand? Are you a entering the market and having to overcome a load of barriers, in terms of trust? So all kinds of things influencing outcome. People like Les Binet and Peter Field, who are sort of sages in the world of media evaluation, they talk about above the line and below the line as two classic, sort of ways of looking at channels. The perfect mix being 60-40, but all of this stuff is totally predicated by the facts, what are you trying to achieve, and who are your audience? I do lots of work with brands actually, where we start by looking at their audience. And I was with a big high street brand a couple of weeks ago, and we looked at their media mix, and we looked at the media habits of their audience, and the two things were polar opposite. They were underscoring, under indexing in all of the technology platforms, overscoring in traditional channels, and yet the selections the brand were making were the opposite. So there's all sorts going on this question, and I think it does come back to what you're trying to achieve. Some test and learn, and the combination of channels to achieve the objective.
There is, to both of your points, a question that's often said about oversaturation and trend jumping. if your audience isn't hanging out where you're advertising, why are you advertising there? Are you just trend jumping? How do brands get that kind of balance right where they want to stay relevant and where people are, but actually listening to the consumer instead of the market?
Yeah, the trend jumping thing. I mean, I remember when I was a media buyer, trend jumping thing is one of those things that happens in this industry probably more than it should do. I think it's actually driven by FOMO rather than trend
It
jumping.
is.
It's more, it's more that
It's
you can't possibly not be on X platform, Y platform. I remember when Facebook started becoming quite big and we were at Omnicom and we saw, lots of clients is coming to us and going, we need to be on Facebook. We're like, hang on a minute. What's your audience? What's your objective? To Gordon's point earlier, rather than just jumping on it. And I think that's always that happens a lot. I think there's also, and I was talking to an agency friend of mine recently, there is also a bit of confirmation bias that's going also into media buying as well, where particularly in agencies, I think there is the age group of the people who are buying media are probably very aware of certain types of media more than they are other media because of their own usage, which is natural, right?
true.
If you are a heavy TikTok user, you're going to recommend TikTok, regardless of whether TikTok is the right for your audience. So I do think there's some interesting challenges here. And I think if you're a client, my advice is resist the temptation. Go back to Gordon's point, define your audience, define your target market. Be honest. But I mean, even when I was at some of the tech companies, I saw people jumping on bandwagons, and we actually showed them that their audience that they thought they were buying was actually not the audience that they should be buying relative to our understanding of what was happening. So a little bit of calmness, but the industry likes a trend, and therefore jumping on the trend. So I think the best solution is probably just to somewhere put an innovation budget somewhere and sort of separate it out and do your learning there rather than necessarily just jump on the bandwagon and say you have to do it because you want to, because you need to do TikTok to tell the CEO you're doing TikTok.
Yeah. And and to that point about testing in a discretionary place to try new ideas in parallel to your established controls. Coca-Cola recently did an A/B test where they found that reallocating budgets to higher attention impression yielding places yielded double-digit performance compared to their established mechanism. And I think it's about go where your audience are, and if you think about FMCG world around a particular retailer is a great place within the retail space, but actually, in the space of retail media and the capability of first-party data for established big FMC players, CPG brands, you can actually go to the sofa. Post-pandemic, more people than ever are actually, operating from home, spending more time in the home environment, and all of us have a home, hopefully, and it's a great place to actually place a message in the myriad of places and options you've got. And and I'm here to talk about the value of placing a personalized, highly relevant print message, to somebody in the home, and the incredible uplift that gives to other channels. We did a study recently, a neuroscience study, where we took brand collateral from all of the participants, and the consumers, a couple of hundred consumers, were wired with the state-of-the-art technology to alert us to brain patterns and the way the brain performed. What we found was individual participants to that neuro study that had received sort of print messages, direct mail messages, were far more likely to recall social media, after being at that exposure, and were 44% more likely to respond to the output of the social media investment. So that multiplier effect is very, very relevant, and context as well. Paul, you've got a great example of people going in the taxi to for holidays, which I think is really relevant. And if you move home, for instance, that's a major change in your habits, in terms of your life stage and your lifestyle. And brands like HelloFresh, they recognise that if they actually tap into that home movement, when you actually arrive at your new home with a welcome message personally addressed to you, it's a really highly, contextualized moment for them to speak. And the share of voice is huge, of course, because you've just come into a new home. It's highly relevant. You're tapping into all of the connectivity around the emotions. So, yeah, I think it's audience, it's context, definitely.
It's interesting while you were speaking, I was thinking about like changes in context. And Tesco do a really great ad where a neighbor, some people just come home with a new baby, and the neighbor's making a meal and listening to this baby cry, and you think, oh, she's getting really agitated here. And then she ends up
Yes.
taking the meal around them. And they're like,
Mm.
oh, we're so sorry. And she was like, I just thought you'd like some food. And that kind of hitting in that moment, because so many people have that experience they can relate to, which
Yes.
then made me think of, HelloFresh, Uber Eats, stuff like that in the same scenario,
Mhm.
hitting them right at that point of emotion. Because you have their attention is just there. They want to hold
The
on to
gates
that
open.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think going back to the previous point, we're talking about media planning. There's a lot of media planning that's driven by reach, not by moments.
Yeah.
And just because something has a reach doesn't mean to say it resonates, because the consumer may not be in that moment ready to accept that message. And I think that's an area, to Gordon's point about retail media and stuff, where I think with things are changing, because you can grab those moments or find those moments where an advertiser potentially can be welcomed in rather than just glossed over.
I mean, we will talk, no doubt, I think, about the barriers that advertisers face in terms of advertising, trusted advertising and favorability, and this explosion of channels, which means that what's actually happening is 60-70% of people now tell us that they're finding ways to actually ignore advertising, to switch it off, to screen it out, to block it out. And that presents in itself a challenge, because the overload of messaging has actually led us to a point now where people are willing to pay money to take away, to screen out those messages they don't want to see. So we've created the problem, i.e. message overload, and we've created the solution, which is give us a little bit of money and we'll take those messages that you don't want to see away. And the technologies, around various platforms now allow you to do that. So in a way, we are the harbingers of our own kind of, doom here, which is that people don't trust advertising, and we've got a tremendous job, to convey a message that people pay attention to and connect with.
I think it's a similar thing like with content strategy, and I'm finding there is an element of, do I trust this? And the level of research that's now conducted is insane. You can't just put out a really well thought out blog post and expect that to be zero moments of truth, because in a world where information is so readily available, they're gonna check 10 different blog posts. It's a whole journey now of research. And when you buy something, I mean, I star reviews for ages before I even consider buying something, unless it's an impulse buy, which is a different thing. But on that, like with the ads and specifically attention, because as you say, so this leads quite nicely into this. Considering the lower attention span for digital ads, for you, Gordon, what are your thoughts on the evolving role of content quality and viewer engagement across traditional and digital platforms?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're all very familiar with the term the attention economy. People have been speaking about it from the 50s. In fact, if you go back to the 1800s, people reading newspapers say, "Oh my God, look at all these adverts! It's getting in the way of my enjoyment of reading this newspaper." So it's a long seeded problem, and people will talk about attention deficit and advertising surplus as a way of saying, "Look, this is the problem we've got." And research which we've played a part in recently with organisations like Walk, it talks about attention being a 3 times more better predictor of positive outcome than simply visibility or viewability. So I think the problem is acute. And for the clients I work with, it comes back to this question: are you a brand that's trusted, so you have a foot in the door and a share of the voice, or are you a technology brand competing, in a very difficult environment with a range of other organisations? And I think what I've seen, because we work with the very big established players like the Boots and the Tesco's that we already mentioned, but also the new entrants. So I've worked with a number of technology brands recently that have reached a point, in their sort of advertising journey, where the organic, performance of the digital sort of default set that they've got as an organization reached a point where something different needs to happen to achieve the results and the growth that their investors want to see. And there's lots of examples where the lazy thinking is younger people, very digitally enabled, won't be interested in print. But all the evidence is quite the opposite, because if you present something to somebody which is very disruptive and different to their norm, that's a moment there which is going to be highly impactful. So Microsoft had done 2 studies on attention spans. That's what I was going to mention. And in 2012, they were talking about the typical human attention span of 15 seconds. When they repeated it in 2020, it had gone down to 12 seconds. Now, look, that's a Microsoft study, and it's a study of one organization, but there is something going on in terms of attention spans, and there's something that we see in the way people are absorbing advertising from multiple sources at the same time. So if a channel could come along and actually grab your solo attention, so it's fully focused, that's going to be far more impactful than the way we are seeing people consume in ethnographic studies a range of different platforms, channels. They're watching TV, they're scrolling, they're replying to an email. That's a very different sort of exposure to actually going to your doormat, picking up a piece of mail which has got your name and address on it, guaranteed eyeballs. It's a physical thing. Now, you need the right mix and the right moments, to deliver the results. So using those kind of blend of combinations and seeking uplift, is the thing you need to be thinking about in terms of combination of channels. And younger people, we find them to be very, very engaging, and when they don't receive much mail, so it's a great opportunity for people to pick that up and kind of own the doormat.
I come at it slightly differently because obviously we, as you know, are not an advertising business. We have an advertising business within our business. And a lot of what we do is, I suppose, perfect from an advertising point of view because it's moments. It is moments. You're getting food delivery, you're being taken somewhere, you're going to the airport or whatever. And those moments, we actually sort of have a pretty strong relationship with our consumers because people spend a lot of time on the app during that process, whether it's booking food or it's going somewhere, because that's the way it works. So I think what we find is that's why we have quite a powerful ad message, because, on the journey side of the house, so with our Wright business, we are basically inserting ads into the Uber app experience. We're not changing the app, which is, I think, critical. Point one, don't change the experience. Add advertising in a manner that is it's not interruptive, but it's present, so it works. And what we're seeing is some really, really high engagement rates because people don't mind ads if they are contextually in the moment relevant, and they have time and they're relevant. So I think the example Gordon and I talked about before was this idea that, if you're going to the airport, we know that you're going through duty free, right? That's very clear that you have to, because it's just the way airports are made, right? You also know you're going through security, but that's less of an interesting one probably. So what a lot of our brands have done, whether it's L'Oreal, Dior, a bunch of brands have basically said, well, we want to advertise people going to those airports because we can encourage people, nudge people to, which is Taylor's book, to think about maybe purchasing this brand rather than that brand once they go through duty free. And I think that's quite powerful, particularly if you get engagement rates that we're getting, which the time spent in the ads is averaging globally about 90 seconds. So some of the campaigns we've seen recently, about 200 seconds.
That's 200 seconds.
So you're a solo advertiser in the journey of the Uber journey. The average Uber journey is anything but around 22 to 25 minutes globally. With airport journeys, it tends to be slightly longer depending on where you're coming from for obvious reasons. And therefore, that advertiser is the only one advertiser sits with you all the way through that journey. Pretty unusual experiences, like
amazing share of voice, isn't it?
But it's like the back page of a magazine. It's just going to be there in front of you while you're doing it. And the engagement rates are very high because then you get, people see the ads, they like them. If they're nice, they're strong visually, that helps. They have a click rate or a call to action maybe that drives a discount or a sample or whatever, something extra that goes with it. So the user benefits. And I think, when we think about attention, there are two ways of looking at attention. There's attention because we need to track attention because, to Gordon's point, it's reducing. That's one thing. But there's also attention about when's the moment to grab that user's attention in the right way.
Yeah.
And that's a different thing because, I think the attention, a lot of the attention work is done on programmatic at the moment, which is basically trying to work out how much of a very vast buy is worth having, which is a sort of, half empty, half full discussion around attention. It's not really necessarily the only thing we should be looking at, because the moment where
I
the
agree.
consumer is engaged is really much more important. And the
Yeah.
same is on the eat side for us as well. Is you have that moment when you've made an order and you're waiting for the delivery guy or
Yeah.
girl to come and deliver it to you, and
Yeah.
that's a captured moment. And that's a moment where we've done a bunch of things, whether we're promoting streaming services because you're going to maybe go and watch TV afterwards, those types of things. So again, smart advertising, engaging with the right people, long engagement times, all that type of stuff, but not interrupting the user experience in a manner
No.
that is just another distraction to the many distractions that they have.
I mean, if it's of interest, actually, I looked at the sort of industry numbers on attention per channel. And this is produced by Lumen, and it's interesting, just to kind of set the context. So a TV 30-second ad typically pulls 13.8 seconds, a 15-second slot 17.5, a YouTube ad typically 5 seconds, Instagram feed 1.7. Facebook in feed 1.6. Direct mail, this is actually the third largest channel, believe it or not, behind digital and TV, and that's 108 seconds because it receives 4 visits. People go back to it on average 4 times. Now, interesting that those same studies talk about if you can increase the attention span by a second, you're likely to increase recall by 78%. By 10 seconds, so in your world, Paul, that's an uplift of 141% in terms of brand recall. To move the dial on purchase intent, the same studies talk about a minimum of 5 seconds, but to actually shift the dial properly, you need to be over 10 seconds of attention to actually change. You think about the barriers and motivations that are required to actually get off the sofa or pick up the phone or pick up the iPad to do something. And they're the kind of studies that come out. And I think you're absolutely right that when the personal relevance is higher because of the right message at the right time, then the magical doorway's kind of open for some great stuff to happen for brands, whether that be home movement, holidays, retirement. There's all these kind of life events. Birthdays is something, which I don't see an awful lot of. Even Christmas. Christmas. There's a great study from it actually won the IPA Effectiveness Award, the Grand Prix, the biggest sort of award in advertising, something called Cadbury's Secret Santa campaign, which at Christmas, of course, getting a share of voice is next to impossible. And it's a very emotional time. It's a great time for telling stories, which is why everybody loves the John Lewis ads and supermarket ads. So Cadbury's kind of thought, well, there's an opportunity here. And what they came up with was this Secret Santa campaign, whereby out of home, digital messaging, print messages, put your phone over this QR code. And actually, for those people that you love and care about, send them a secret bar of chocolate. And of course, that's where the physical part of the campaign comes in and they achieved amazing things in terms of 120,000, free chocolate bars were sent, but actually they shifted brand share by 1.4% compared to the previous year and sales by 6.1%. An amazing story of all those different channels telling a story at the right time, going to the right people, and you're getting a double bang there because you've got the sender who's sending the chocolate bar and the receiver. So it's a real double uplift for the brand.
See, I know we're talking about attention, but through both your points and your comments, I just kept thinking, but what we're doing is adding joy. That's what we're doing. We're adding moments of joy because that's what you have to create something. You can't just grab the attention anymore. You have to add something more to that. And it's something that what I do is I'm trying constantly to make things a little bit better, a better experience. Where do you land on kind of joy and attention and how it works together?
With a lot of the Uber stuff, I think it's joy and it's anticipation as well. It's your favorite food delivery restaurant is about to deliver your food, or you're going on holiday, or you're going to a bar to meet your friends, or you're going to a restaurant to do stuff, or you're going to a football game, or whatever it is. So I think there's a sort of consumer. We know that there's a consumer thing about it that it's sort of joy, it's sort of culture, it's a lot of things in it, and that matters, and that is a great time for advertisers to capture at the same time any of those moments, because I think they're all positive moments. But even that positive moment of coming home, I suppose, is another moment for a lot of people.
Of course it is.
People forget that sometimes. I think in our wacky world of digital marketing is like, we don't really think about the context of the consumer, what they're doing at that moment, because is someone on a social media platform on the train in the same headspace as someone on a desktop in the office on the social media platform? I don't think we talk about that much. We tend to just say digital is digital, and therefore it's all
Yeah.
is what it is. But I think this point about moments and capturing that anticipation is interesting. We did some work with Warner's on a album release they had for Ed Sheeran, and we targeted a bunch of people who'd been to music venues before using our Uber data. And it was really interesting because the engagement rates were pretty high, but they were really high on Saturday evenings where people were going to music events
Mm.
in Uber, or they're going out, whatever they were doing. And we found some of the best engagements were actually at music events as well, where people were actually going to music events. So if you correlate that sort of the content with the consumer understanding, then that point of joy really does work, I think, because people go, that's great, and they could all jump off the ad and go straight to Spotify and listen to the album. So I think there is something in that whole concept, definitely.
Joy's one of the range of emotions, and again, there's loads of studies that show if you think about the brain as a rational or an emotional thing, which it is, system 1, system 2. And we looked at 10 years worth of advertising, from a sort of media owner perspective. And what we saw was the rational messages have actually overtaken the emotional messaging in the last 10 years. And at the same time, we've seen this decline in the IPA talk about declining marketing effectiveness. And I mentioned Peterfield earlier. He did a study that showed that messaging with emotion at its core, that could be joy, that could be fear, surprise, delight, happiness. They will always outperform the rational. This is now, you can buy this thing for 20 pence less, for instance, the very rational argument. And as human beings, we are an emotional species. And what we do is we take an emotional reaction to stimulus, and then we rationalize the decision we make, on all forms of life. So messaging, whereby you're actually leaning into those range of emotions, is going to outperform just the rational, approach.
On that, do you think there's a difference between digital and traditional and how we capture those emotions? Do you think one is better than the other, or is it an omni-channel thing?
Well, if I could just come in and say, I mean, first of all, the premise of traditional and new media, I mean, that doesn't sit easily with me, because I think about my daughter. She won't go anywhere near Facebook now. She's 25 and she considers it really, really uncool. And if I was to say to an advertising conference, there is this new channel that's being created that's got 95% engagement, which delivers 30% commercial return, which is welcomed by consumers, they'd all go crazy, say, what is this new shiny thing that you talk of? But it's actually direct mail. This thing about a piece of paper that's personalized to you with some typography and pictography that's relevant to you. But so this new and old thing, I don't know that it's relevant anymore. And certainly, Facebook's become a thing for the older person now. So is that a new? Do you consider that a new thing? It's the audience, it's the objective, it's what we're trying to achieve to the budget we have. So I just sort of put that marker down to say, I don't know if that's a particular. It's like people for many years said to me, should we be offline or online? As if that's some sort of big decision sitting there to make. Well, why would you not be both? Why would you not reinforce everything you do digitally and amplify everything? Where budget allowed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the odd thing sometimes is when you're talking to media buying companies about this, is they do like to categorize you. Here's an interesting one. So sometimes we were approached an agency recently, and they said, oh, you're out of home. And I'm like, hang on a minute. I'm not sure we are out of home, because I think that's probably just the wrong definition, because I don't think you regard people using Facebook or Google in a taxi as out of home, right? The same way. But there's just this theory that, you've got to put us in a bucket, and therefore we're a sort of weird bucket. And I think that the challenge is, this is an industry challenge, because of the way we are set up. There is a bit of traditional versus digital, or this platform versus that platform, and that type of thing, which actually I think, add to Gordon's point. It's no
And
consumer.
what's your thoughts, Paul, as a sort of player with a long history of utilizing different platforms, different channels, the media agencies' remuneration, in terms of things the agency want to be seen to be involved with, things that give them a kickback, etc. How much of that is if at all is an issue?
I think there are always issues about the buying models that the agencies have, because obviously, they've evolved them to maximize for their benefit,
Right.
and to some degree that probably works for some clients as well. I mean, I'm not saying it's purely
Yeah.
agency driven thing.
No.
What I would say, I think there's a little bit of there's a lack of, perhaps more of a lack of innovation now than there used to be, because we've now got these very established big brands like the Googles and Metas of this world, who can command, repeat bid budgets pretty consistently, almost to a level where you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, where's the innovation coming in here? And are we thinking about consumers, or are we just buying reach because reach is classified that way? And I think that's the bigger problem. The remuneration thing, I think, is a challenge, particularly around programmatic, because I don't think it encourages the best practice. I mean, it still amazes me, and I've worked in the industry for a long time, that we are in a situation where 20% of media spend across digital is probably going to fraudulent websites and funding all sorts of stuff that no one seems to really want to talk about.
No.
But yet, actually, for each individual advertiser, it's probably a small amount of money, so therefore it sort of doesn't matter to them individually. But that's where we're at. So I think there's a lot of issues that we're not really addressing, and the sort of super tanker of digital marketing keeps going, because I think clients can always keep re-justifying digital investment because there's some form of ROI against it.
Yes.
And I've yet to find, and I love marketing directors dearly, but I've yet to find one who actually would want to reduce their budget rather than increase it.
No.
Because that isn't the way it works, right? You want to have a maximum budget, of course you do, and I get it. So there's a sort of flywheel effect that's going on that I think is the wider issue. And I think consumers are probably sitting there going, this is all a bit crazy, but the consumers don't think of it in the same way that we've created this model. I think the question for us going forward the next 10 years is, one, what's the disruption going to be, if any? And two, where does the model go from here? Because does it necessarily work to consumers and to advertisers' needs?
So looking at this, as digital spaces become more crowded and the evidence research, do you think that you would ever find a cause for direct mail for Uber advertising? Because I know you do.
I mean, that's not no. For Uber's marketing, may well do, and that's not my team. So from an Uber point of view, I think we obviously work at a local and a national scale, so we do different campaigns for different things. We've done quite a lot of localization always for a lot of what we do, and within that, there is a bunch of things we do that would include direct mail and all those other things. So yes. I think if the point is there a resurgence in other areas? I don't know if it's a resurgence. I think it's just a recognition of the value of each channel. Back to Gordon's point a bit originally about what's the audience and what do you do. I think the challenge lies in do all advertisers think that way? Well, the answer is no, they don't. And that may be more of the issue, because they may just want to jump on the latest bandwagon because it's sort of there. And if you look at the average time that people spend in marketing roles, it's quite a short period of time. So, they want to make a name, they go and do probably this year will be some AI thing that, probably makes no difference to anybody, but looks great on the front page of a trade magazine.
Was it a surprise to you?
Was I surprised?
No, I'm not massively surprised by any of this. I mean, I think, it's hard to get people's attention, right? In a world where you've got multiple screens, you've got lots of distractions, you've got stuff going on around you all over the place, it doesn't really surprise me. So I think the important thing is to understand where you can get those moments and how to dive into those, because that's
when you need them. Yeah.
When you exactly.
I think Becca said moment. Did you use the term moments of truth earlier? I think if you think about the funnel, you need to add value throughout the funnel, from the awareness at the top through to the conversion at the bottom. direct mail channel has traditionally been recognized as something that's great at converting sales, because it will tip people over the edge with a personalized message, where they're allowed to consider, the options and are fully focused on the message. But actually, I think, the opportunity to your question about resurgence, but the real magic, I think, happens when you can, maximize your digital assets with the physical options to actually push people to those digital experiences, which is where brands want to play, and where they're investing huge sums of money. So there's technology now where you can send a consumer some perspex, and they can load it onto their iPhone, sit it on top of the iPhone, and a hologram can play in the room with the latest Porsche or latest Land Rover vehicle. And obviously to get that piece of kit to the end consumer, you need to put it in an envelope and send it to their home address. And QR codes, voice recognition, with the digital print now, whereby the QR code is being overtaken now by a product being the queue. So when the mobile phone recognizes the product, it takes you straight to the website. To do that, of course, you need the physical print. There are challenges, of course, in all media. There's reducing circulation in the print world. It's very, very tough. It's very, very tough. And I think to be successful, you've got to think about the right message at the right time to the right person, and nothing really moves me on from that, that view.
The number of brands that we speak to now, these are CPG tier 1 brands, that's our kind of target, that aren't using creative testing and predictive
I agree.
analytics is insane. Given that attention is such a key part of everything, have you found it difficult to get buy-in for direct mail and attention? Because we sure as hell do.
Oh, for sure. I think Paul's talked about the FOMO and the need to run to the shiny thing. That's fine. But actually, when we talk about attention, when I speak to clients about the way they present their message, there's attention from a channel perspective, and we've talked a lot about that today. But then there's the presentation of the message, and there's the way the human brain and eye are calibrated to respond to different contrasts, colors, shapes. What I say to clients is, when I advise them on attention metrics, is what's the attention hierarchy? Because we can use technology to assess in pre-campaign testing the performance of visuals, from an eye tracking perspective. And that pre-campaign testing, often as not, will reveal the following: is that people are looking at this thing on the content, on the design, and not the thing the client wants them to focus on. And we are calibrated to comprehend data most clearly when it's black on white. Unfortunately for the creators of the world, that contrast is the clearest and easiest way. And I always talk in three. So I talk glance, scan, read. And if you don't actually secure in the first millisecond, of exposure, the glance, you will not get the scan and you will not get the read. So it comes back to the whole proposition, but the design, and the options myriad that you have. And by the way, design is a very difficult area for marketeers, because everyone wants to engage on it. Everybody in the organization has got an opinion on the design of the message, and it's not based on science, on testing. It's just people's opinion, and sometimes that's a massive barrier to actually moving to a more effective approach.
And I think on the creative side, it's interesting with the journey ad proposition we have from Uber Rides, because what we're actually reversed. We actually encourage people to put color, because the predominant Uber app is black and white, right? So it stands out.
Yep.
Which is so attention. It drives attention that way. So that's an important thing. But even then, we can guide people, because we know there are sort of three units. The first unit is the first bit when you're getting a card coming to you. Now that's a swipeable unit, but it's non-clickable. And we've had some really, really interesting people test a lot of different ways of making it more swipeable in a strange way. But because we don't say swipe, naturally people do swipe on phones. That's what we do, right? We swipe up, left and right, or we swipe up and down. And a couple of brands, I know the Universal team on Drake's album. Drake had an album out, which was his son had done the creative for it. And they worked really hard on this, and they got a really fantastic swipe rate because they just encouraged people to, what is this? And then swipe it. So they got that engagement very early on. And that's a really good example of how to think it through, because you're thinking the consumer is sitting there, they've got nothing, they're waiting for the car to confirm. So there's a moment of attention. How do you get them to engage with your content? And then the next units are actually clickables. But again, we encourage people, brands, to recognize where the consumer is on their journey, because it's not just the creative, but it's also the creative content. So we've had campaigns where people get told, tourist in London says, welcome to London. Now that simple message gives a brand such a greater authority with that user than it would have had if it just had just a picture. So there's quite a lot of, I think, and this whole thing about attention, when you have an attention moment like we do, use your creative a lot to think about how you're going to engage with that audience, because don't just turn up with the same thing that you might have created for YouTube, because it probably won't work, because you're talking about different context. And I think that's the big challenge, getting brands to think differently creatively about these different moments, different formats to work. And to Gordon's point, what works with direct mail isn't going to work for Uber ads, but that's fine. But both of them are as valid as each other for the same for a consumer group.
Organizations are so risk averse, aren't they? And do what works. So stepping outside of that can be difficult. And how can I present the thing I do as a means to make their life better, or to help them navigate a problem, or to Becca's point, to grab hold of that joy moment which we're all craving for. And the orthodox thinking is there to be challenged, isn't it? So stepping outside of what works sometimes to try something totally different, to learn some lessons is equally valid.
Thank you both so much for your insights. And I'm sure that our audience will have a lot of earworms going, because I do. I have loads of ringworms going now. So thank you both for your time.